I'm on my way to Edmonton, Alberta, where I'll pick up Barb, and she'll join me on this adventure to British Columbia, the Yukon, and Alaska.
Well, we made it to Dawson Creek here at the beginning of the Alaska Highway. We're in Dawson Creek, British Columbia. It is Monday, July 1st, 2019, and it's Dominion Day here in Canada. And this is when the adventure begins and on our trip up the Alaska Highway.
This is the road just north of Dawson Creek. The pavement is pretty good. It's all mostly smooth asphalt. As you can see, traffic's a little heavy. There's one car coming in the opposite direction. This is pretty much how the highway is for most of it. Very little traffic. Once you get to Fort Nelson, the pavement turns to a chip seal, which is kind of a coarse, rough asphalt.
Here's Barb taking pictures of the flowers on the side of the road on the Alaska Highway.
This was our first black bear sighting on the highway. We saw many bears along the route. Most of them just ate on the side of the road, didn't bother us, just looked at us. There's an original section of the Alaska Highway, the curved wooden bridge, which is a rarity. The Liard Hot Springs is a must stop on the Alaska Highway. It's one of the nicest campgrounds on our trip, along with the natural hot springs.
Here we're walking on the boardwalk to the Liard Hot Springs in British Columbia. Barb's going to take a picture.
Of course.
Now we're on the cool side of the hot springs. Not a lot cooler, but it is cooler.
Feels good.
Well, we're here at the famous Signpost Forest in Watson Lake in the Yukon, and we have our sign that we're going to find a spot to put it on, and we'll see what we can do. Last count, someone last year said there were over 88,000 signs stuck up here. That's what they estimated, so we'll just add to it. So here we have our sign up at the Signpost Forest, right in the front, one of the front posts right at the entrance.
This is a typical construction zone on the Alaska Highway where you're escorted through by a lead vehicle. Actually, this site was pretty well maintained, not too many ruts or muddy. On July 4th, Barb's birthday, we spent the night at the Northern Lights Resort just south of Whitehorse in the Yukon. A German couple owned the resort, and we had our own separate cabin. The dining room was in the main building, and we had a fabulous dinner prepared by a young chef and his wife, who are originally from Vancouver.
We're in Whitehorse in the Yukon, which is the capital of the Yukon. And here at the Transportation Museum, they have a DC-3 weather vane out in front of the museum. It actually rotates with the wind. actually pretty cool to see.
This is the Brayburn Lodge on the Klondike Highway on the way to Dawson City. They're famous for their $10 monstrous cinnamon buns, which are very large, but just very average, nothing to brag about. It's also a stop on an Iditarod type dog sled race in the wintertime. This was one of many wildfires we saw. This one was on the way to Dawson City. It was only about a mile and a half away from us. We could feel the heat on the left side of our body as we drove by.
Here we're walking down one of the streets here in Dawson City in the Yukon. Some of these buildings are under restoration or waiting to be restored. This is an older section of town. This is Diamond Tooth Gertie's gambling hall, and they have a nightly can-can show, which we'll be headed to tonight. This is the Downtown Hotel, home of the infamous Sour Toe cocktail. Unfortunately, we're leaving in the morning early, and the line was way too long to do the drink, so I'm going to pass on this one. Maybe if we ever get back here again, we'll try it some other time.
Here we're going to be taking the ferry across the Yukon River to the start of the top of the World Highway. This is the top of the World Highway from the Yukon River to the Alaska border. This 79-mile road has some spectacular views of the Alaska Range. However, it's gravel and dirt, and we were lucky it wasn't wet and rainy the day we traveled.
Slight delay here on the top of the World Highway just before the customs station at the border of Alaska. We have a whole herd of caribou coming up and crossing the road.
We're leaving the Yukon and headed toward the Alaska border. This is the northernmost land border crossing in the United States. It's about 40 miles from the border to Chicken, Alaska. The first 13 miles are recently paved smooth asphalt. After that is gravel and dirt and extremely dusty, and especially when many of the RVs passed us heading in the opposite direction. It was probably the dustiest road we've ever been on.
We're here in Delta Junction, Alaska, at the official end of the Alaska Highway. Here we are at the public viewing of the Alaska pipeline. We are just north of Fairbanks, and this is the actual pipeline that runs from the Arctic Ocean all the way down to Valdez, Alaska. Here's a close-up of the pipeline and the supports that hold it when the pipeline is above ground. There are some sections where the pipeline does go underground. Here you can see the pipeline off in the distance does go underground. This device here is a pig, which helps improve the flow of oil through the pipeline. And it also serves to clean the inside wall of the pipe as well.
We took a half-day bus tour into Denali National Park. It was not that spectacular since we saw a lot more wildlife along the Alaska Highway. After leaving Denali, we traveled to Anchorage where Barb caught her flight back to Michigan. After Barb left for home, I traveled from Anchorage down to Homer, Alaska.
The Homer Spit has mostly restaurants, gift shops, along with a marina at the end. And there are hundreds and hundreds of campers, motorhomes, RVs, along with hundreds and hundreds of cars on a strip of land that's barely 200 yards wide in some points. This is Captain Paddy's restaurant, where I had a great fresh halibut lunch. This is the infamous Salty Dog Saloon. It's really just a dive bar, and the inside has tons of dollar bills stapled all over the walls and the ceiling, messages and notes that people have written on.
Here I'm taking the ferry from Haines, Alaska to Skagway, Alaska. The trip by boat was about an hour by water. However, the distance to Skagway would have been 350 miles if I went by land.
Here we are in downtown Skagway, Alaska. This is one part of downtown, and the famous Red Onion there on the corner. Here's another view of the Red Onion Saloon, where you can get the famous brothel tours for $10. This is one of the first snow blowers used to clear the snow off the train tracks. Well, here I am. I made it to the Northwest Territories, the sign behind me, and where I am, it's about 80 miles north of the Alaska Highway and just outside of Fort Nelson. So it's about 80 miles back to the highway and another 17 miles to Fort Nelson.
The Icefields Parkway between Jasper and Banff is truly spectacular with the mountains and glaciers. On my way home, I stopped at Glacier National Park in Montana, which was my second time visiting here. Going to the Sun Road was just as spectacular as the first time I rode it, and Glacier ranks among my top national parks. This was my last night of my trip home back to Michigan. I had a campsite at Harrisville State Park on Lake Huron, and I arrived home the next day after being on the road for 5.5 weeks and traveling just over 11,000 miles. Would I do the Alaska Highway again? Absolutely.